Hi, everybody. I'm here today with Josh Casson. I'm very excited to introduce him to you because he was one of our featured speakers at our compliance event a couple of months ago. And Josh really stood out, was so helpful to the entire group because he really is the manufacturing compliance guy with so much experience, and he speaks from the heart. He's warm and wonderful, very easy to talk to. Josh, you were great in that meeting.
Thanks. Yeah, I was happy to be there, and there's a lot of great perspectives from different people, and so it was nice to be a part of it. And I'm looking forward to doing more of that kind of stuff with the camps group.
And we appreciate that. And you're right. There were people on the panel that were speaking from the manufacturing point of view, but you were speaking really from the somebody who knew from beginning to end how to get manufacturers to a place of compliance that wasn't so painful. And I really appreciated that.
Thanks. I've enjoyed that throughout my career. I got into quality assurance because I like the big business picture perspective. I didn't want to be focused on supply chain or purchasing or inventory or something. Quality assurance gets me to see that whole thing, and I enjoy helping companies wrap their head around the big picture perspective and areas that they can drive for improvements.
I'll tell you, when I talk to manufacturers, one of the most painful areas of their business is compliance. And sometimes there are AS 9100, there's ISOs, there's federal or there's state. But a lot of times, if you're operating in Washington state, like many of our manufacturers are, they get regulations and other compliance requirements from other states, like California. And unfortunately, for many of our small manufacturers, that becomes evening work, right? They're trying to build things during the day. So compliance has been a real pain point. And I watch them roll their eyes when we talk about it.
And that's kind of the reason why I got into the consulting side of this is I want to be able to help take some of that burden off. Since we're talking about me, I'm going to gloat about me a little bit, but it's not typical for me to expound upon who I am in a gloating manner. But I do fractional QA management for a couple of companies. So they don't have the individuals that they can commit to doing it full time. And that makes sense. And so I can come in and do some portion of even just as few as a couple of days a month of helping them build out these systems and improving them, taking some of that workload off of their plate. But ultimately, my goal is always to build systems that are easy, that they function within the way that their organization works. There are always going to be those requirements, like you mentioned, California, like Prop 65, where you've got to do labeling and you've got to manage things that maybe doesn't make sense for your business as a whole. But coming up with creative ways to build it into your operations is one of the things that I'm just really good at. I enjoy.
I think it's good for people to know that not only are you somebody who could consult them on a project, but you could be a fractional compliance officer in their company and help build those systems. And that's one thing I was very impressed with is that you say it's not always just like compliance or meeting regulations for a product, but you think of compliance a little bit more as a management system.
Absolutely. Everybody hears, for example, quality management system, and they think it's how you manage the quality of your products. I hear quality management system, and I think it's the quality of how you manage your system. And so, if you look at that across the board, how are you communicating? What culture do you have within your organization? A lot of those bigger picture perspectives. And so, when I come in, I don't just solve a problem. I look at everything, and I share knowledge freely. And so, if I see something, I want to talk about it, and we can help shape organizations to be great things. And a lot of times people are like, "Oh, I've never thought of it that way." As an example, there was a company that I worked with down in Salem, and they were interested in getting AS 9100 certified. And they had looked online and they downloaded the manuals and put their name in and did what most people typically do and tried to build it out according to the way everybody else does it, but they build a unique product and they have different processes. And so I took the time to go down there and meet with them. I looked at what they do, and we built a totally different system. And in the process of building that out, a lot of light bulbs went off for them. And they're like, wow, you can do it this way? And I was like, why can't you? And they're like, well, that's not what everybody else does. And my
Yeah.
view is everybody else does it this way is the same thing as we've always done it this way. I think
Yes.
those are both synonymous with we're just going to do what's status quo instead of figuring out a system that works the best for you. And that's what I really try and do. I prefer to call it integrated management system in the fact that I want quality or environmental health and safety. I want all of those things integrated into the way you do your business, not as additional requirements, but I want to find ways that you're already managing your business and use those to satisfy those requirements. Like I said, that
Like that.
Prop 65 might be an addition in there that you're just going to have to do it. But can we streamline it? Is there some automation technique we can apply that makes it easier for you guys and to go from there?
This kind of goes back to your philosophy of shifting the focus of how they look at compliance, because so many times when I talk to manufacturers, compliance is a pain.
Yeah,
But you view that quite differently.
definitely. I guess if you're going to view it from the fact of managing inventory or buying parts or any of those things as a pain, sure, just running a business can be a pain. But if you can build out good systems that things just naturally function the way that they should, and it's almost a secondary thought, which I would say is a key for any business system. If you can do that, then it no longer becomes a pain. It's just this is the way we do work. And then when you start talking about things like audits and stuff, you never have to prepare for an audit. You just do what you always do. And so that's really my ultimate goal.
I'll tell you, I've talked to so many companies who spend inordinate amounts of time getting ready for an audit. It'd be so cool if your system was so good that what you are prepared for the audit.
And I think from what I've seen through customers is it tends to be a cultural thing and the way that their QMS is built out. It A lot of people use it as a bolt-on system and they're like, we've got to do these extra steps. But if they're already built in, you're doing them normally. It's just a part of your everyday life and then it's easy.
So something that you mentioned is that compliance, a lot of times we can look at it as an obstacle or something I have to do. But a lot of times you said baked into compliance is really good business practices, really good customer and safety practices that actually might even open up new markets.
Definitely. And that's really, I'll say, you'll have customers who flow down requirements for you. If you want to build aerospace parts, you have to be AS 9100. However, if you start to take on new ventures if you move into, if you add into environmental or health and safety, you're going to start attracting new potential customers because they then see they've got a quality management system that does more than what they're required to do. You're out there trying to just build a great business. And that's an amazing draw that you can pull in all kinds of work from that.
So something I've heard you talk about is an all-in approach. So how do you think about all in?
All in really for me, is it integrated and is it core to your business? If I was to go to your shop floor and I walked over to somebody and I said, hey, how does your company feel about quality? How do they respond? Oh, it's amazing. We do this, we do that. Or is it like, yeah, we build good stuff. How invested is your organization in building that out? And is it just a part of your normal culture? Because that's when you get to that point we were talking about where it's not a stressor because it's just what we do every day.
Compliance, in the beginning, it seems like kind of digs deeply into their processes, right? So how do you walk somebody through this kind of the hard questions that sometimes they get in a compliance process?
What I do first off is I explain the requirements of the standard because when I leave, I want everybody to understand why it's beneficial to them as a business, not
Mm.
what the requirement is. For example, in ISO 9001, there's a requirement to do management reviews. Why should you as a business owner want to do management reviews? It gives you a good look at your business. It lets you see how your processes are performing. There's so many benefits to you. And when we talk about that, there should be a desire on your part to want to do that because it's going to be beneficial. And so that's how I do it. I start walking through talking about here's the things, here's why they're good to do, and let's talk about what you do now. Because I've had people in using management review as an example who they do it once a year and it's a half a day event. I also have had people who they meet every week as a management team. And so with those individuals, I say, well, you're already doing it. Why don't you just in January cover this one extra topic and in February cover this one extra topic? And there's no impact to your business now because we've integrated it into your management meetings you already have. And so that's kind of how I do it. I explain the requirements and then I look at what they're currently doing and we try and weave it in there. And if they're not doing something, we'll walk through that and kind of figure out how they can add it in pretty easy.
I've heard manufacturers express this frustration in the past that they have a compliance checklist or a regulation checklist, and they're checking the checklist as they go build the product or package the product. And then they go and inspect it afterwards and find out that it was all checked off on the checklist, but in reality, the product wasn't even compliant, right? It seems like sometimes compliance can be automatic without being effective. And that's been a frustration I've heard.
Definitely. I think there's multiple different potential causes for that. Sometimes it's people pencil whipping things. They know they've got to check it off in order to pass it over to the next level. They mark down all 20 check boxes and pass the piece of paper over. In those moments, you just kind of need to dig into it and say, hey, what is the cause? I need to interview people. I need to go out there and look at how they're using it. And if that's the case, then it's a stagnant tool. And maybe you need to break those check boxes up into each individual step instead of at that one point. Also, do you need the checklist? Is it needed, or are you just creating records for the sake of creating records? And I'll say that's something that I really do with a lot of my customers too, is look at their QMS and say, wow, you have a bunch of documents, you have a bunch of records. What do you really need? And if you guys need them, if it's functioning and it's helping your business, great, keep them. But if you don't need them, I'm a fan of just minimizing and getting rid of them.
I even like that better, the fact that maybe you could minimize or get rid of those type of things. But one of the things I've been very impressed with talking to you is this idea that you have this view of how compliance is actually helpful to your products, it's helpful to your team, it's helpful to your customers, but it also can open up market opportunity. So it's like a whole new point of view. But also, I think in my experience that many companies, because they're maybe a little understaffed or they got a backlog of business, or their customers are calling and saying, I need this yesterday. But for a lot of different reasons, businesses and manufacturers can get into a really reactive mode. And especially if, hey, we've got an audit coming up, but we've got to hurry and fix these things. Anyway, it somehow gets them into a reactive mode, where I know in our conversations you've talked about how your systems and your processes, your approach leads them to more of a proactive.
Absolutely. Risk is baked into a lot of the standards nowadays. And so, really, as you move into things, we talked about management review a minute ago. In management review, for example, you're looking at metrics. And yes, that might be reactionary, but you can also use those as predictive indicators for, okay, it feels like our inventory levels are getting out of control. What do we need to do to manage that better? And I think across the board, when you build out these systems, you want to use that data to look forward into the future and say, okay, where do we think this is leading us before we get there? And then you've got the time to deal with it.
I really like that. And one of the things that I've come across with you is that compliance isn't it's the death of guesswork, but it's not the beginning of bureaucracy. And so sometimes it's easy to look at compliance and go, I've got to have a person who does this. But what's your thoughts on that?
I, I'm going to say that I don't think that you ever have to have a person who does this. Sometimes it's easier from a management standpoint to have a designated individual, but I've definitely worked with companies where we've built out entire quality management systems without a single quality assurance individual. So there's no quality manager, they don't have any quality engineers. And the way that you do that is you take those same level of responsibilities and just divvy them up to who really should own them. And that's one of those things that I do when I first start off with an organization, is figure out what is your structure, who owns which requirements. On the opposite hand, I've had a lot of organizations who do have that quality structure, and they lump it all in and say, hey, this is all Kirk's responsibility. He's the QA manager, he owns all of this. When you can't control the quality of the products and you can't control how we qualify suppliers and stuff. So really those things should be divvied up between who really does own them, and you then become a support system for those processes. And so some of that's cultural shifting and figuring out how does the organization really need to run.
My goodness. For me, this is really exciting because you're bringing solutions and a way of looking at this that I think is really helpful to the business. Just that last part about divvying up the responsibilities to the person who's actually doing it could simplify things so much.
It really does. And the fact of, like we talked, I just mentioned qualifying suppliers. As a quality assurance individual, when I first began, I used to tell the purchasing manager, here's what you need to do. Here's the survey you need to send out. When it comes back, you need to do this. And then over time, I realized I'm dictating to them how they should do their process. they're the ones who know what the best way to do their process is. So instead, I just say, here's what I need. I need some way to make sure that the suppliers we're using are going to be good. What's a great way for you to do that? And then they come back and say, we already get this, or we already have weekly meetings, or I have metrics. Great, let's use that then. And so then now they're building out a system that makes sense for how they want to run their portion of the business.
And you've said before that lean thinking is the relentless elimination of frustration.
So that's exactly my viewpoint for lean is I started off my journey with lean looking at it from a waste standpoint like most businesses do. And then as I started to teach people and I started building out lean systems, I realized that when you find a waste, really it's linked into somebody's frustration. And that can absolutely be in the workplace, but it also can be in real life. I'll give you an example. I love this stuff so much. I bring my work home with me. And when my son was a teenager, he would drink all the milk. And then it would be the morning, I'm getting ready to leave for work. And he would say, "Hey, Dad, we're out of milk. What am I supposed to have for breakfast?" And I would say, "I just bought that gallon 2 days ago." And it was frustrating to me because in that moment now, I've got to figure out how I've got to get more milk and stuff. And so I instituted a Kanban system for our milk. And we put a label on it that when he used the first one, he put that on the fridge, which signified, hey, we need more milk. I would buy more milk. We never ran out because there was that level of frustration there. But I used lean tools to solve it. And if you really look at your day to day life, your commute to work, it's frustrating. Why? Because you're waiting. That's a waste. If you look at anything that frustrates you in your life, you can link it to one of those 8 wastes. And so that was one of those aha moments in my life that has helped me to teach people rather than sit down and talk about the 8 wastes and how they function from a business perspective. I tend to start with, okay, what's frustrating in your job? What's the thing that drives you bonkers? And then from there, we start to dig into it and we can realize, oh, this is the waste it's related to. Now we can use tools to solve that waste. And then you not only do you get better systems as a business, but you also increase your employee satisfaction because you're not telling them, I need better cost savings. You're saying, I want to help solve a problem for you. And they say, great. And so you get the added benefit across the board.
So you're solving all kinds of problems in your approach. And I really like that. You said before too that procedures protect the audit and training empowers the person.
Absolutely. I think procedures are, in my opinion, the must do. We have to ship good products to our customers, for example. That maybe that's an outline in a procedure. And then a training is going to talk about how do we do that. What I see with a lot of my customers too is they've combined the two. And so they might say, we're going to package stuff and we're going to use this material. We're going to wrap it this way. We're going to put this kind of tape on there. And that's going to be how we're going to ship our customers good stuff. And then they get an audit and somebody used a different kind of tape. It probably was still just fine to ship to the customer, but your procedure said you were going to use that kind and you use something different. So now you get an audit finding because you deviated from the way your procedure said, which is the must do. However, if your must do is that we're going to appropriately package and ship products to our customer on time, yep, it looks like it was appropriately packaged to me. And then in the training, you can talk about the best practices, which is use this kind of tape and do that. And so I see a lot of people being overly prescriptive in their procedures and things, which creates more challenges for them. And equally, procedures aren't reviewed very frequently. And so the individuals who may need to know about the new tape or whatever, they're not aware of it. But a training gives you the ability to kind of loop around with them and make sure that they're aware of it all.
I'm really excited to talk about this part of what you do, but you talk about how you drive culture through systems.
Culture through systems is all about working with that team to say, hey, what do you do and how do you function? And then you talk about those requirements. Here's what we want to do, and here's why. Change management's just a big part of what I do, right? And so working with the teams when you come in to implement those systems is key in getting their buy-in and their input. And then from there, you can build out into those cultural systems because now they've got a stake in it and they realize that, hey, this is a great thing for me to do. And then the chances of them deviating off of that path, which happens because we're all humans, is a lot less likely because now they realize why that you're doing it instead of just that, hey, I flowed down this requirement for us to start monitoring this thing. Now they realize, oh, we want to monitor this because this is going to help me get additional support, or this is going to help me get those tools. And so building that culture is key.
But this leads us to the conversation of your new technology you implemented at the beginning of this year, and that's what I want to talk about.
Definitely. In my consulting career, there's been a lot of people who struggle with internal audits. And I always come in and implement a very similar system for every one of them. I don't see internal audits as being overly complex, but a lot of people struggle with it. And so every time I build up the same framework, I got to the point where I said, I'm limited on the number of people I can help by doing it one on one with them. And so I said, why don't I hire some developers? We'll build out a web based application that people can use. And so we've built, I call it Audit Intelligence, and it's a web-based internal audit platform. It supports multiple standards, ISO 9001, AS 9100, environmental health and safety. It even has some stuff in there for ITAR and EAR, and we've got a bunch of other standards on the way. And what it does is it lets you identify which process owns which requirements, like we said, who owns it. And then from there, you build out a schedule, and the system takes over. It will send notifications to the different users to make sure that they do the trainings that are built into the system for those standards. It lets them know when they need to do their audit. And then the great thing too is that the audits are the system's web based. And so they can actually go out to the floor with their phone and do an audit. So instead of writing down a bunch of notes for, hey, I looked at this PO number, which was dated this date and that thing, they just snap a photo. It stores it in there. So it reduces a lot of that time to conduct the audit. And it's supported by AI in multiple different areas. And so in that example, when you snap a photo of that PO, and you identify, is it conforming or not conforming? And then, or is there an opportunity for improvement? And then why? And then you can have AI generate the write up for you, and it'll pull in the requirement and it drafts it all out nice and neat. It's got a lot of key metrics so you can monitor your internal audit program. And it was truly designed for small to medium sized businesses because that's who my core clientele tends to be. And when we talk about like pricing and stuff, it's extremely affordable. And the whole hope is that it helps support these key audit systems, but also lets you drive towards that preventative stuff we were talking about earlier with those metrics and things where you can look for trends and say, it seems like we have a lot of problems with this area. Maybe we need to do some training, or maybe we need to implement new tools, and to go from there. So I'm really happy about it. We've got a few customers who are either using it now and they're enjoying it, and looking forward to the continued advancements we're putting into the application this year.
You know, what I'm hearing from you, Josh, is that you have a way to help eliminate the frustration sometimes that's associated with compliance, the reactive mode, and sometimes the painful, oh no, we have an audit thing. But you've done this through what you do personally, but now the software program could really build some long-term sustainable practices into the business.
Exactly. And you can set up the intervals and how often you're doing the audits, what kind of bite-sized pieces you're doing. Like I said, it's got built-in training too. So one of the challenges that I saw with people in their internal audit programs is they would send individuals to a week-long training course to teach them all about AS 9100. And they would come back and maybe retain 20%. And then you would expect them throughout the next year to go out and audit to those requirements, and they would struggle. Our system looks at the clauses that are assigned for the audit coming up, and they've got a training just for that. And so if you're going to if you're going to audit purchasing in December, great, you're going to learn about purchasing in November, and you're not inundated with a whole standard worth of information right now. It gives you those bite-sized pieces. So like you said, you can continue to develop and build your business and monitor and improve it throughout the year in little chunks instead of it being a week or 2 week long event where you've got to scramble to do things.
I think of cramming for the test kind of a thing. And now it's just built into the way that you do things. And I love your example of the employees being able to snap a photo and upload it.
Yeah.
It makes that so much easier than manual reporting.
Absolutely. We actually just added in the ability to do audio recordings and video too. For example, let's say there was a requirement for you to understand the quality policy. I wouldn't need to do anything other than come out and say, I'm just going to record this really quick, and hit the record button like we're doing now and say, hey, Kirk, can you tell me a little bit about the quality policy? You talk about it. I hit stop. That's my objective evidence. I'm done. I move on. The system actually can use AI to go through and review that video and say, oh, Kirk believes this. He hit these key points, so it's good. Or he was missing some of it. And like I said, too, I just want to be clear, it's supported by AI. It's not fully driven by AI. You can turn off any of the AI functions and it's still an amazing application. They're just there to help streamline the processes a little
Makes it
more.
easier.
Exactly.
This is so well thought out, Josh. I think that people should be very excited about the message that you're advancing here about how compliance can really become part of the business, part of the culture, the system under which we operate, solving a ton of problems, but really opening up the company for market opportunities and happier customers, all the things that are going to lead to more business.
I couldn't have said it better, Kirk.
Well, after hearing this conversation, people are going to want to say, how do I get a hold of Josh? So, how do we get a hold of you?
Definitely. So my email is Josh, Josh, at hdsolutions.consulting. And feel free to email me there. I also have a website, hdsolutions.consulting. And if you're interested in the application, it's Audintelligence, as in audit, AUDIT, and then ELLIGENCE.com. And if you go to that website, you can take a look at the features and stuff. And you can even book a demo with me if you want to dig into it a little bit more. There's a little book a demo link.
That's
And
great.
on
I'm going to
LinkedIn
put
and all that stuff too.
I'm going to put all of this in the description of the video so that people have it right there in the video. And I really appreciate this, your message. I appreciate what you're doing for companies. And why not make compliance the good part of the business instead of the hard part of the business?
Exactly. And honestly, it's nice to pay my bills, but really the cool thing is when I leave a company and the light bulb has clicked in and they're like, wow, this is amazing. And that really makes me happy.
I love that. Josh, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Kirk.